we're going to make a melt and pour loofah soap today, and it's very simple, and I think you're going to like the results. I kept one the last time I made this, and I really enjoy it because the loofah is already in the soap. I'm Tracy from teachmetracy.com. I do include these DIYs on my channel, even though it may seem like it doesn't have anything to do with homeschool. But it's also a nice way for moms to maybe show a little love to other moms, or to save a little bit of money. Instead of buying gifts, you can make them yourself. And for us personally, I started making our own lotion, body butter, shower soap, all kinds of different soaps around, I guess it was about 6 years ago, maybe now. I don't know. Eric J was a little guy when I started doing this because he developed eczema. And I was reluctant to give him any of the prescription creams that had steroids or anything else that was involved with it. So I learned how to make a body butter recipe. And then from there, I started taking a whole bunch of classes because it was something that I was interested in. So in our house, we don't buy soap anymore. We don't buy lotion. And it's a great way for me to be able to not only express love to my friends and family, but they're great for hostess gifts, for new mom gifts, for, I don't know, Mother's Day gifts, you name it, you can use any of these for. So we're going to go through this process and we're going to make it from start to finish. And I will link below in the description all the products that I'm using here, and I will give you the recipe also. So make sure that you are checking out the description box. Okay, so before you get started, I recommend that you gather all the supplies that we're going to need. And so let's go through those really quick. The very first thing that you're going to want to have is 91% or better isopropyl alcohol. This will kill pretty much all germs. Of course, you want to have your hands washed and whatever utensils you're using and your soap molds and whatever else you're using. You want to make sure that you give those a good spray after you have washed those items and they're dry. So I have actually already done that step here. The next thing you're going to want to have is a couple of knives because you're going to need to chop down your soap. You can't just put it in a big block and stick it in the microwave because it will never melt. And then you might have a chance that it would burn or something else. So you might want to make sure that you have a couple of knives so that you can chop it down. You're going to want probably a wooden skewer. The color that we're going to use, I use these little Dixie cups that the dentist uses. So these are mica powders. And using these with your melt and pour soap, we're going to add some alcohol to them, and then we're going to stir up the color, and then we will add it later. And these mica powders look like they have a little bit of glitter in them. They turn out really nice. And then, of course, we have our loofah here. We're actually going to use a knife on this, a serrated knife, just like bread. We're going to cut it, and we're going to add it to our soap. Just as a side note about loofah, loofah grows on a vine, much like a cucumber, and it's actually edible. I was not aware of that until probably a couple years ago. I wanted to grow some loofah, and then I found out it was a vine, and then I didn't want anything to do with a vine, because if you're not diligent about how to take care of a vine, it will take over everything. And so I was a little intimidated, so I haven't tried to plant one before. But I did learn through that process that in some Asian countries, they actually eat this. And of course, you don't eat it when it's dry like this, but you can eat it when it's wet. So I've never tried it before. I'm a little bit scared to try it, if you will, but I understand in a few Asian countries, they do eat loofah. Anyway, so we're going to cut this loofah up, and we're actually going to add it to our soap mold. The next thing that we have here is the spray bottle with our alcohol in it, and we will be using that later. And then we have our scent, which is called a pineapple sage. This is my absolute favorite spring and summer scent. It is one that I get requested to make all the time, and it works in both candles and soaps. This comes from Candle Science. They're one of my very favorite companies to get fragrance from. I love it. They're strong. They last a long time if you're using it in either soaps or candles. And then we have some grapeseed oil that I want to use today. Now you can use any kind of oil, and you don't need a lot, but it just helps with the moisturization in the skin, and it's a little extra added touch. So it's not required if you don't want to use it, but I typically put it into my melt and pour soap because it does make it a little bit more luxurious. So I like to use the lighter color oils. This one happens to be grapeseed oil, and the rumor is that grapeseed oil has some skin tightening properties to it. So, it's not going to cure wrinkles. It's not going to cure anything, but grapeseed oil is said to have certain skin tightening properties to it. The next thing we have is of course, a paper towel and some extra stirrers just in case we need them. And then we have our soap molds. Now I like the round because it's just a little bit different looking, and because the loofah is round, so I don't have to cut any extra shapes or anything. So I like to use a round mold, and each one of these cavities is 4 ounces. When you receive your molds from the shipping company or when you buy them, they will, of course, be in a package that tells you what each cavity holds and how much the total capacity is. But if you're like me and you end up accumulating more than a couple of dozen soap molds, you may not remember how much each cavity holds. I mean, you could always figure it out. But what I like to do is I like to write how many ounces each one will hold on there with a Sharpie so that I don't have to remember. If you watch this channel long enough, you know I'm a little bit on the lazy side. So anything that I can do to make my life a little bit easier, I like to. So we also have a scale, and you're going to need a scale that you can tear in the middle. That just means that you can restart it if there's something already on the scale, so it zeroes it out. So if you're adding, for instance, oil to the soap and you want to make sure that you get the right amount of oil into the soap, then you're going to hit the tear button and it will zero it out, and then you can add the oil and you know exactly how much oil you're adding to it. The last couple of things have to do with the soap. So this is how your soap typically comes, and I like to order my soap from a place called Nature's Garden. I'll link it down below. But this is how your melt and pour soap comes. And these are in 2-pound blocks. And this is why you need the scale to measure it, because we don't need all of it to make this loofah soap. We only need a certain amount. So it's convenient. It's cut in these little squares here so that you can kind of measure it out. And then the last thing that we have here are our pitchers that we will use to put our soap in and put it in the microwave. Now, when you make melt and pour soap, you do want to use the microwave. I don't recommend that you use a double boiler situation because a double boiler could burn your soap. And so the microwave in most cases is preferred because it will give you the most control. So now we're just going to start cutting up our soap and then putting it into our plastic pitchers, and then we're going to microwave it. I'll speed through this for you. Okay, so now we're going to weigh it out. Tear our scale, put your plastic container on there, hit tear again, and that will zero everything out. Okay, so now we have 24 ounces of soap divided between the 3 pitchers. And so now we're going to start microwaving them one at a time. And we're going to microwave them at 25-second increments. And then we will check them and see if they need to be microwaved anymore, because we do not want any lumps. You have to make sure that it's a liquid consistency with no lumps, but you don't want to overheat the melt and pour soap because it will burn and it will be glumpy and glumpy. It will be clumpy and gross and all stick together, and you won't be able to work with it. So there is a fine line between melted and burned. So we just want to keep an eye on it. All right, so now that our soap is in the microwave, we are going to now cut the loofah. Right. So we're going to cut 6 loofahs. We need one more. I sprayed this before, but I am going to spray this guy again just to be on the safe side. So with these loofahs, you actually just stick them right down in the soap mold. And since they're a little stiff, you kind of have to manipulate them in there. But All right, so here you go. Here's our loofahs down in our soap mold. At this time, we can go ahead now and add our alcohol to our mica powder so that the color dissolves. You don't have to worry about there being an alcohol smell or anything. There are several ways to dissolve mica powder, but the best way that I have found in melt and pour soap is to mix it with alcohol. So let's check and see how our soap is melting. Yeah, this guy's going to need a little bit more. That's not even melted. So we're going to have to go a little bit more. All right, I'm going to stir this one for a little bit and see how this one comes out. You don't want any lumps when it comes to melt and pour soap. Every bit of it's got to be dissolved. And so sometimes it may look like it's not dissolved, but if you hang on to it for a couple of seconds and stir it, you might find that it dissolves. And this one might be okay now. Once our soap is all melted, let's check the temperature. And I think I forgot to mention this early. I'm sorry about that, but you do need something to measure the temperature of soap. We don't want it too hot, because if you pour your scent in when it's very hot, the scent will burn right off and then you won't have any fragrance in your soap. That's one reason. And two, you want to make sure that you're not letting it cool off too much, because then your soap won't pour. So it's recommended that you read whatever the manufacturer instructions are that you should pour. And in this case, it's around 121, 122, something like that. So you need to make sure that you're keeping an eye on the temperatures. Okay, so this guy here, we're going to put to the side a little bit. This one here is at 125. So let's give our color, we'll do the yellow first. A little bit of a stir to make sure that our powder didn't settle down to the bottom. We're going to pour in the color, stir it. Make sure the color gets saturated pretty well in there. Then we're going to add our oil. And again, since there's only two things we're doing, you can eyeball it. So I just put half in one and half in the other one. Put your oil in. And then again, for our fragrance, since it's, the bottle will tell you, or the manufacturer instructions will tell you how much or what percentage you should use in any kind of soap, candle, lotion, and it will also tell you what it's appropriate to use it for. So for instance, some of these scents you can only use in candles, some you can use in candles and soap, some you can use in soaps and lotions. So you get the drift, right? So in this case, we can go up to 6% in the soap, and this happens to be a little bit on the lighter side of a fragrance. So I like to add the maximum. And again, since it's only two that we're splitting, I'm going to try to eyeball this. And it's okay. You can eyeball this. All right, so let's make sure you get everything stirred and ready to go. Make sure it's incorporated in there very well. I don't know if you can see that on camera or not, but it's a nice, pretty yellow. When you're stirring also, you don't want to stir too fast and you don't want to agitate it too much, because remember, this is soap and it will bubble up on you quite a bit. So don't stir very fast when you're stirring melt and pour soap. You'll end up with a lot of bubbles. Okay, so this guy is ready to pour. All right, so that's why we have these long spouts, so you can pour more precisely. So we're just going to pour it right on top of the loofah. Super, super easy. And you may have to, this is why you want clean hands, you may have to hold down that loofah just a little bit if it starts to pop up, because you want it to stay down at the bottom. Okay, this one's wanting to rise a little bit, so we're going to take our little stick here and poke it down a little bit. All right, and then the last thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take your alcohol in your spray bottle and you're going to want to spray the tops of your melt and pour soap. And the reason that you want to do that is because all melt and pour soap, when you make it and when you pour it, is going to have little bubbles that come to the surface. Especially if you're doing any kind of add-ons or any kind of special ingredient like this loofah, you will have bubbles that come to the surface, and your soap will have bubbles throughout it unless you take the extra time to spray the alcohol on top and get rid of the bubbles. I was making soap for gosh, I don't even know how long, and no one told me that you needed to spray it, and I kept wondering why I had all these bubbles. So my family and we had soap fails that we used as our soap for a long time because I felt like I couldn't give it away as gifts because I didn't like the way it looked. Here you go. Here's our loofah melt and pour soap. I think it's going to turn out great, but we're going to have to wait for it to set for a full 24 hours. So I will be back with you tomorrow when this sets up and we will unmold it. So we're ready for our unmolding. So now when we pop these out of here, we'll see what they look like. I'm not sure if the camera picks it up or not, but it does have the little, it looks like yellow glitter flakes. Here's the second one. All right, so that's all 6 of our loofah soaps. So when you've got your soap all cleaned up and it's ready to go, and again, you want to make sure that you have clean hands because you are touching these soaps quite a bit. So when you are all finished and ready to wrap your melt and pour soap, make sure that you wrap it first in saran wrap. And the reason you want to wrap it in saran wrap is because unlike cold processed soap, melt and pour soap has a tendency to sweat. And so if you wrap it in plastic, it doesn't sweat. You don't want melt and pour soap to sweat because it will be goopy and then they really won't be able to use it. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to wrap it in saran wrap. Or you can get some plastic shrink wrap. I like to wrap mine in saran wrap, even if I were to sell it, because I feel like the saran wrap gives it a little bit more of a handmade feel to it. But I know a lot of people use the shrink wrap, and that's okay too. But I just wrap mine this way. And then once the saran wrap is finished, then I go ahead and I will wrap the outside of it in wax paper for your soap. So we're going to do that for all of these. Okay, here's our 6 little gems. That's all I have for you today. I hope you had fun making loofah soap. If you try it, let me know in the comments below how it worked out for you. I'll see you right back here next time. There's another video coming up.